As a child, I used to suffer from terrible shyness. At school, I wouldn't even have put my hand up in class to ask a question. So when I did my very first talk show, it was with David Frost, who unbelievably gave me the entire programme, even though at that point nobody had ever heard of me. And I don't actually know who was more nervous, whether it was he or whether it was I. But you'll see in the entirety of this programme from 1974, it caused an enormous response, not only in this country, but across the world. Not least because he'd actually told me that it was being recorded in a studio and had told me that there was no audience because he knew how shy I was. So you can imagine how I felt when I walked out to find myself in front of a live audience of 600 people. As the camera started to roll, and this was literally live, we had one electrical catastrophe after another. And it began to look as though we would maybe never actually get on air. David was completely rattled by this. And I know one of the headlines the next day in the newspaper was, teenage psychic reduces David Frost to a gibbering jelly. Anyway, watch it and you'll see why.
They weren't listening to what I just said to you, and they're supposed to know. No, the way we do it is we do we do a straight opening ending with the words, "in the Western world," at which point then the music starts, and we applaud Matthew, and then at the end of that music we start the conversation. Maybe this is the first effect you had on the tape, you see.
Seconds for Frost interview, Matthew Manning, BTC 6HT 95376, take 2.
What are all those figures?
27. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
My guest tonight is Matthew Manning, who at the age of 19 is not only the author of an upcoming book called The Link, The Extraordinary Gifts of a Teenage Psychic, but has also been described by Dr. George Owen, Fellow of Trinity, Director of the New Horizons Research Foundation in Toronto, as probably the most gifted psychic in the Western world. We only want that interview on when slides are being shown, that monitor on when slides are being shown. We don't want it on all through the show. It's only there for the slides. It's very distracting for both of us through the show.
Did you hear that, Mike? Yes. Well, what are you going to be? What are you going to do? He's going to black and he's done his opening shot.
It was still on when we were starting to talk, though.
He's going to go to black.
Well, can we have it off all the while, except when we have slides?
Right.
Not even at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, and you can look to camera forward if you would, save me running from the video.
Okay.
Right, turn that.
Because I saw you looking at it, and I would look at it too. And we just want to have a natter. The arrangements for this evening's show were made by Mr. Gordon Liddy, by the way. Yes, don't gaze at it too intently. Yes, sir. I'll give it. I didn't say Oxford, did I? But I didn't give. And we're both Cambridge men, aren't we? So down at
30 seconds for Frost interview. Matthew Manning, BTC 6HT 95376, take 3. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
My guest tonight is Matthew Manning, who at the age of 19 is not only the author of a forthcoming book called The Link, The Extraordinary Gifts of a Teenage Psychic, but has also been described by no less an authority than Dr. George Owen, Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, Director of the New Horizons Research Foundation in Toronto as, quote, probably the most gifted psychic in the Western world. We got the plug-in.
When my father came down one morning to open up the fire and to draw back the curtains, and he found a silver tankard lying on the floor, which should have been on a shelf, and it had somehow fallen down onto the floor.
So we have to start once again, apparently.
What went wrong that time? Now, I got the feeling that that was a bit quieter, wasn't it? Yes.
We missed your first question.
And we also, Fred, can Fred hear me? Mike hear me?
Mike? Yes, Jan.
The sound was half what it was when we okayed it beforehand. It must be double that because it was much quieter at the back.
Right, they're working on it.
Much quieter. So gets to go back to the highest level we tested.
It'll go out alive at this rate.
Yes.
Here we go once again. Stop running. "45 seconds. For Frost interview, Matthew Manning, BTC 6HT 95376, take 4.
Return to Matthew Manning.
20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
My guest tonight is Matthew Manning, who at the age of 19 is not only the author of a forthcoming book called The Link, The Extraordinary Gifts of a Teenage Psychic, but also been described by no less an authority than Dr. George Owen, Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, Director of the New Horizons Research Foundation in Toronto as, quote, probably the most gifted psychic in the Western world.
years ago, when one morning my father came down to open up an all-night burning fire and to draw back the curtains, and he found a silver tankard lying on the floor, which had fallen from a shelf. And had it just fallen normally from a shelf, it would have hit the cupboard, and it would have landed on the cupboard, but it was on the floor. And so our first reaction was to think there were burglars. And we checked all the windows, and the windows were undisturbed, and nothing else was missing, which was odd. And so then we thought, well, perhaps the shelf has warped or something. And we thought nothing more of it until about 3 or 4 days later, when exactly the same thing happened again, and the tankard was again found on the floor. And then we became a bit suspicious because we hadn't got any pets, so no animals could have caused this tankard to fall on the floor. There was still nothing else missing, so it wasn't burglars. And it just seemed rather odd. And it was then, I think, that my father, rather than myself, began to think that perhaps there was something more to it than met the eye. And we were all questioned, and everybody thought it was everybody else moving the tankard, and everybody denied it. And we forgot about it again, until the next morning, when exactly the same thing happened again. The same tankard was found on the floor, only this time we found that a vase of flowers had been moved right across the room onto a table, the vase of flowers shouldn't have been on the table, and also a china dog had been moved. And then we realized, I think, or my father realized, that we were in the middle of a poltergeist attack.
You realized that soon, Mr. Manning, did you, in fact, that you were in the middle of a poltergeist attack after about the second or third occurrence?
That was my reaction, certainly, yes.
And were you amazed? I mean, had you heard about poltergeist before? Because it's an extraordinary thing to happen to anyone, obviously.
I think I was surprised, certainly, but I had read Harry Price's book, Poltergeist Over England, some considerable time previously, and I think certain of the remarks and ideas that Price put forward in his book at that time had stuck with me, and I think it was the recollection of that book that made me conclude that probably this may well have been a poltergeist outbreak.
And when was it, Matthew, that in addition to things being moved around, also new objects were introduced, weren't they, or apports?
Well, first of all, there was an initial outbreak of poltergeist, which was in 1967, which lasted for about 3 months, and although we were extremely disturbed by it at the time, it was extremely minor in comparison with what was to come. And I think the largest object that was ever moved during that 1967 episode, when I was 11, was probably an armchair. And after that, George Owen said, "Oh, well, it will go away." And it did go away. We went away on holiday and nothing ever happened again until about 4 years later. And then after that, things started to move again, small things around me, which only I would see. And I told my parents about it, and they said, "No, we don't believe this, because George Owen has told us that these things don't come back again once they've happened once." And so I thought to myself, right, well, since I've got such a hostile reaction, I shan't bother to tell them anything else. And this went on for some months, I think, until eventually things started moving, and they were noticing things that were moving, and they weren't telling me. And so we were playing this game, and the things would move in front of me, and I wouldn't say anything, and then they would notice things that had moved, and they didn't tell me. And then eventually it all came to a head, and one evening they had some friends in, and just as they were showing their friends out, they found a large pewter charger plate upturned on a table, which they thought was odd. And they didn't say anything about it, although they were rather embarrassed at the time. And they came back into the room where they'd been sitting, and the settee on which they'd been sitting was pulled right across the room, and by that time I'd gone to bed. And they thought to themselves, I think, well, obviously something is going on. And at the time that settee had moved across the room and I'd gone to bed, I was lying in bed when suddenly there was a creaking noise coming from one side of the room. And I had a heavy wardrobe in my room. And I switched on the light as I heard this peculiar noise, and the wardrobe was inching out from the wall towards me. And it moved out about 18 inches towards me.
And you hadn't been drinking that evening?
No. And so I think I was probably so frightened at that stage that I just thought, well, I don't know what I did think. And so I just switched out the light again and let it carry on.
And how close did it get?
It stopped, I think, after about 18 inches, but that wasn't the end of it. After I switched out the light, my bed started to vibrate. And the bed vibrated. And then I felt the feet rising up into the air. And I thought, well, I don't know. And I was so terrified by that stage that I just didn't know what to do, so I just lay in bed terrified. And then the head end started to move up as well. So I was completely airborne in this bed. And it then shot round into the room so that it was completely at an angle to the room. And I was dropped down from about 6 inches in a bed. And I thought, well, I'm not going to put up with that anymore. I'm not sleeping in that room anymore. So I went and told my parents then about what had happened. And of course we then realised that we were caught in another episode of Poltergeist. And after that, it just exploded.
And was that when some of these objects we have here, like this aged piece of bread, when were they introduced into the story?
This was about the same time. This was a few months later after the initial violent poltergeist outbreak. These were found in the house.
And these were found in the house, and there was no explanation for where they had come from?
There didn't seem to be, no.
And this was a piece of bread, how old?
Well, it was analysed by a scientific laboratory, and all they were willing to say was that it had been baked after 1876, but before 1914.
Roughly like the bread obtainable in any average supermarket. But then, and these books were, you don't know why these arrived?
No, these also appeared. I mean, none of these things have any relevance to the house, really. We have there's no reason why they should appear. It's a complete Magpies collection. There are also 2 cigarettes which appeared, which are of a brand which aren't even made anymore and weren't made when they appeared.
Weren't made when they appeared either. And then things started happening at school too.
These actually appeared slightly after the things started happening at school. These appeared in August 1971, and the initial very violent poltergeist was from about April 1971 to probably July 1971.
And I know we've got some of your school friends here in the front row too. Peter, what was the most remarkable thing that you actually saw?
Well, the things that were happening in the dormitory, really.
What sort of things were happening in the dormitory?
Knives and forks. Knives and forks just being, well, seemingly thrown across the dormitory. They didn't hit anybody, not that I can think of anyway. And this was something we got used to after a while. It's commonplace.
Really? Shows you can get used to anything in time, I suppose. Mr. Buchanan, as headmaster of Oakham at the time, you twice had to seriously consider whether, in the interests of other parents' concern and concern for their boy, whether you should have to ask Matthew to leave, didn't you?
Yes, one did, but the surprising thing was that, mercifully, one got no reaction from other parents, actually. And I tried to play the whole thing down, being fairly square about it myself and being rather sceptical in the first instance. I didn't actually witness anything myself, merely hearsay from various other boys and friends of Matthew's in the dormitory, but I was perfectly satisfied from what they said. Something very peculiar was going on. But mercifully, no parent complained, and we carried on and played it in as low a key as possible, and eventually the thing really died down from our point of view.
But you were convinced from the questioning that you did that something was going on.
I was.
Now, how soon after this did your gifts or the things happening to you widen, would you like a cigarette? Even further? I mean, at what point did you start finding about those things that you could do that were in a sense automatic, the automatic writing or the automatic painting?
Well, at that stage we were absolutely desperate to try and find something that would stop this everyday things being moved around. And I even was taken to some peculiar man in a nearby town who gave me an exorcising ritual, which worked, I think, for about the first 2 nights, and after that failed to work anymore. I think if he told me to stand on my head on a bucket, it would have worked. And we were so desperate to find something, and nobody knew what to try. And then one day I was writing an essay for school. I can't even remember what it was about, and I was thinking of something to write, and my pen was poised above the paper as I was thinking of something to write, and suddenly my hand was pushed down onto the paper, and I started scrawling across the paper in a handwriting that wasn't my own, and I didn't know what I was writing. And it shook me, and I think I tore it up at the time. I didn't know what I'd written. It was incomprehensible, it was illegible. And after that, nothing happened for 4 days. There was no poltergeist activity at all. And then it started happening again. And so I thought, well, perhaps if I try and see if I can do that writing again, the poltergeist will stop. And so this basically was what I did. I just trained myself to do automatic writing. And the poltergeist died down. And then I've developed the automatic writing into automatic drawing and into all the other things.
Yes, now, what was the first automatic writing that happened? I mean, we've got an example here. I know of once when you wrote a Stafford Cripps letter, which is very close to a Stafford Cripps letter that we found today. I don't know whether you can see it on the screen or not. But what was the first automatic writing you did, in fact?
I think probably the first ones were completely out of my control as they were. They were just any spirits, and I hate the word spirits. I wish somebody would find a better word. It makes me sound like an old woman in a darkened room. But it was, I seemed to just attract anything that would be nearby, and I would scrawl anything or write anything. It was of my own doing, I mean, it was completely voluntary. I wasn't being possessed or anything. And then I began to think of people who I knew who had died, and so I would ask them questions. And I'd get through answers in automatic writing, which seemed to later be established as correct.
Not just people you knew, but also
People who I didn't know as well, yes.
people whose names you knew. You did one
Yes,
thing
and
with
even-
Adolf Hitler, didn't you?
Yes, and even people who were not English, which accounts for several of the scripts that are written in languages of which I have no knowledge.
Several times you wrote in various languages, that's right,
Yes.
Arabic text, for instance, and I think we've got a couple of slides somewhere that can be flashed up of your writing in an Arabic text and so
Yes.
on. Now, I mean, did you have at that time a knowledge of when this thing was going to happen? I mean, did you cause the experience to happen, or did it happen to you, or did it in a voice say someone was ready?
No,
Who motivated it?
There were no voices or anything. Initially, I was doing this automatic writing purely to stop the poltergeist phenomena. And after I'd done so much automatic writing, the poltergeist phenomena died down anyway, as I suspect they would have done even if I hadn't done any automatic writing. And after that, as I say, I just found that I could do this automatic writing, and with certain people or names, I seemed to get some sort of message in automatic writing. It doesn't work with everybody who I try to communicate with, but it
And
certainly
when
works with
did,
a
for
lot.
instance, your communication become established with Dr. Penn, for instance?
I think that was probably in about 1972.
How did that happen?
I think, if I remember rightly, my grandmother was ill in hospital, and nobody seemed to know quite what was wrong with her. And so I got Thomas Penn to do a diagnosis of her, and in actual fact, he wrote more or less what the hospital at the time thought was wrong with her.
Who was Dr. Penn?
I don't know. He's just somebody who comes through and writes medical diagnoses which seem to be startlingly correct.
And Dr. Penn comes through, do you know when Dr. Penn's coming through? This is one of the incredible things, the phrase they use is switching the power on, that you can control this
He
to
seems
some
to
extent.
be, I seem to be able to get hold of him, as it were, at will. If I want to get hold of him to do a diagnosis on somebody, it seems to work.
Well, let's see how that operates now. We have here, from our audience, the birth dates, which is what Dr. Penn requires,
Yes.
of 6 members of our audience, and someone else just handed me another one, actually, which I'll add on the bottom, if you want to choose that one. So there are 7 there, and these are just the dates of birth of 7 people in our audience who have or have had illnesses or current health defects. Can I talk to you while this is going
Yes.
on or not?
Yes. If I write down the date in my handwriting.
That handwriting now is not yours.
No.
Do you know how long what you're getting is going to be, or not until you
No,
finish
it
it?
keeps writing. So I may be here for another half an hour.
12th August 1974. Which has a misprint at the top. You took the 6th one down, which is 12th August 1947. Someone born on the 12th of August 1974 wouldn't have had time to develop. Do you feel just the same now as you did earlier when you were talking to us?
I think so.
I don't know where the person is in our audience, but Dr. Penn, through Matthew, is saying, this is a most interesting case. Here we have chiefly a very bad back problem, maybe a slipped disc. There's also some instance of kidney malfunctions. There is here a very emotional and often very, can't read that next word, person whose nerves are given to fraying. And there's a little more. Thank you very much. Who was it in our audience who was born on the 12th of August 1947? Could you indicate with your hand? The lady in the third row, welcome. I don't think I can get over to you with this particular microphone, but I think we can catch you with that one, and I'll repeat anything. This is a most interesting case. Here we have chiefly a very bad back problem, maybe. I think that was slip disc, do you?
Yes, there was also some instance.
Also
Evidence of
some evidence of kidney malfunctions. Are either of those true?
The latter, yes, and with my back, in fact, I have had some trouble, but I didn't realise what it could be.
You've had trouble with your back, and there has been some evidence of kidney
A
malfunction.
certain numb feeling very often base in my spine, but I didn't know really what it was. But I did have some kidney trouble about a year and a half ago.
Going on, there is here a very emotional and often very
well,
there
impulsive
impulsive person whose nerves are given to fraying. There is also going to be a heart complaint.
possibly a stroke.
Rheumatism and arthritis. Aren't you glad you came? Will also be prominent. In haste, Thomas Penn.
You must have known you were here.
Well, the part that we can test is remarkably accurate. Are you very emotional and so on?
Yes, I have actually got heart trouble, yes.
Have you?
Yes, yes. I have a double beat on the aorta valve. That is supposed to be the problem. What do we do?
Well, that's extraordinary. No sign, I trust, of rheumatism or arthritis. That's in the future. It says will also. Well, that... Wow, I must say that's extraordinary. Shall we just do one more,
If you'd like to do
do you
another.
think? And then we'll move on. Thank you very much. One. 21st of October, 1947. on to the 6th line of this, as you can probably see on the cameras. Dr. Penn's writing is going to hell here. Here basically we have, according to this, a skin complaint. Where is 21st of October 1947? The lady down here in the front. This is what it says. Here basically we have a skin complaint. They suffer badly from a white blood corpuscle balance, which is causing skin troubles and also affecting the lymphatic glands. There is a what?
Tendency of water in the legs.
There is a tendency of water in the legs. What's that?
Strangely, I think.
Strangely, at the same time, we have a case of high blood pressure.
And brittle bones.
And brittle bones. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I've got plenty of freckles, but apart from that, I don't think I've got any skin complaint. No, I've got a heart complaint. I've got malfunctioning valves.
Malfunctioning valves of the heart. And that is not really covered by the wording, is it?
No.
Hmm? No, it's not. No. I didn't think it was. And have you got, or do you want to have, water in the legs?
I haven't looked recently, but I don't think I have got any water in the legs.
And you've never had water on the knee or anything?
No, not even water on the brain, as far as I can make out.
Well, this is all good news. Well, we had there an absolutely extraordinary degree of accuracy in the first case. I mean, extraordinary degree of accuracy. And basically no accuracy in the second one. How would you read it?
I would agree with you.
And does that, I mean, is Dr. Penn extraordinarily accurate at times and wrong at times?
He's usually more accurate than is wrong, but on the occasions that he's wrong, he's usually totally wrong, but it's not very often. Usually he is as accurate or more accurate than he was in the first one.
As accurate or more accurate?
Yes. Or more specific, should I say, rather than accurate.
In other words, there is so much to talk about to you, this is the problem. But I mean, just pursuing this a stage further, if we were to do a third, he would likely to be accurate.
I can't say.
No, I mean, there's obviously special conditions. But we have so little time, I don't think we've got time to... I think we're going to have to come back to Dr. Penn on another occasion, because in an attempt, there is also this, how do you explain that and the automatic painting? Because at school, I gather, Mr. Buchanan, that in fact, he was not an outstanding art student.
No, this is the director of arts word for this, but he wasn't. He was a very poor draftsman, but in fact managed to produce a variety of what I would call parodies, pastiche of various great artists.
When did that start?
In October 1971, I think.
And this, for instance...
That is a collection of some of the drawings.
Some of the drawings.
Yes.
This one, by again, someone who, according to his art master, had no artistic particular ability. This one, after Picasso, as it were. And sitting over here, we have, in fact, in our front row, an art expert, sitting right down there from Sotheby's. Is it, I keep trying to remember, Thilo or Thilo? Thilo. Thilo von Watzdorf from Sotheby's, who would say that Are these remarkable to be drawn by someone without artistic training or skills?
Yes, I think I would have thought it must be drawn by somebody who has great skills, but since I was told that he hasn't from school, they are very clever, they're very good.
Do you know when one of these, this is a Picasso again, of course, do you know when these are coming on?
Well, usually I just sit down to try and reproduce.
You sit down to try and
do one.
Now,
yes.
here's a Beardsley, an extraordinary Beardsley. Did you know when you came to do that, did you say, I want to recreate Beardsley?
Yes.
Or did Beardsley
Yes.
come?
No, with that one I deliberately sat down and tried to do Beardsley.
You deliberately?
Yes, as with these I tried to sit down and do Picasso.
And here, this is Dürer. And again, given the background, yes?
Yes, I mean, it looks very much in the manner of Dürer. But there's puzzled by one drawing, I don't know if you have it there, which is half Dürer and half Beardsley. And it's attributed to, quote, Dürer, but in fact the face is a typical Beardsley face. I don't know if you have it there. I was rather puzzled.
Would you be aware of something like that happening? You're sometimes aware of the handwriting changing?
Yes, I think it has happened occasionally, but certainly I wasn't aware of the particular drawing that you're referring to.
And there are some, again, remarkable draftsmanship of paintings. And this, viewers at home may care to join in knowing what artist inspired or transmitted his thoughts to you in the case of those, because
Yes.
we simply do not know. Now, but we would be interested to know. Now, trying to cover the whole range, which it is difficult to do, everyone has found at the same time. I wonder if, Peter, sitting where you are, you could explain from there, if I show you the extraordinary thing about these two brainwave drawings.
Well, these are the results from Toronto, where this is actually the work of Dr. Joel Whitten, who examined Matthew under normal condition and during paranormal exercises. And in the course of this, they discovered a brain function which they have named a ramp function because it looks like a ramp. There is no such word in any scientific dictionary at the moment. You will have this on the left-hand side. On the right, for example, on your left, David, you have this is the normal brain function of Matthew under normal condition, which will coincide with most people. On the other graph, you have Matthew's ramp function, which is in so far extraordinary. I mean, unfortunately, Dr. Whitten hasn't published all of them. There were a great number of these taken, and if this were to be described as 100%, the next highest rating was 25% of a ramp function produced in another person, and here I say believed to be psychic. I mean, who is there to judge?
Are these, Professor Hasted of Birkbeck, are these graphs remarkable?
Yes, this afternoon I read this report, and it seems to me very sound work. Of course, you'd have to know what was meant by paranormal phenomena, and I take it that this was bending of metal. I've taken part in sessions examining bending of metal with Yuri Geller, and I believe that these things take place, so that it's certainly in advance to know that when you're doing this, you show a certain EEG with a high proportion of very low frequency waves.
But you mean, now, the thing that fascinated me too, Matthew, was yesterday seeing that you can switch on this special power that you have, whatever it is.
Yes.
That you can actually control it. I mean, I don't know whether we've got the slides, for instance, but could you explain what we did with those 4 Curlian photographs yesterday with Peter Banda? That we took Ian Johnston, the producer, mine, and then also yours in a normal state, first of all, didn't we?
Yes.
And we took those, and what did we get? Can you describe it to us? We'll see it on the screen in a moment.
Ian Johnston's was normal. Yours was normal.
There's one. There's another. That's
Yes.
mine, I think.
And then
there was
my
yours.
normal one.
Then there's your normal one coming up. Perhaps that's it.
That's my normal
That's
one.
your normal one.
And then there was my
Now, before we go on to the other one, what does that show?
Well, that shows basically my normal fingerprint with the energy coming out of my fingers at a normal level.
Right. And then we said, switch on the power.
Yes.
And we got that, which is totally different and suggests what sort of power was exercised.
Well, there was considerably more power coming through my hand than there was when I was just normal.
And what did you do? Because what happened was, we got this machine. If we'd had the time, we'd have done it here today. That we did it yesterday, and we saw it. But we were putting our fingers onto something, and then when Peter Bander said to you, right, will you do it again, but this time with the concentrate your powers.
Yes.
What did you do then?
I can't exactly explain what it is, but there's something that I can, in my mind, I say, right, I'm going to switch the power on. And I just channel all my thoughts into my finger and into that machine. And that is what produces that Kirlian photograph.
Well, we have to leave that discussion here. Switching the power on, what did the thing with Dr. Penn show? What uses could such power as we have seen be put to? These are things we'd like to return to on another occasion. But we leave the debate there with you, with our thanks to Matthew Manning. Good night.
Thank you.